I never thought my Tuesday morning would start with a middle-aged woman standing on my doorstep, demanding copies of my house keys like she owned the place. But here we are. Her name was Karen Anderson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association in Scottsdale, Arizona. And she had that particular look in her eyes that told me this conversation was going to be a disaster. "Mr. Young, I'm not asking, I'm telling you," Karen said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "According to Section 14.7 of the HOA covenant, the association board has the right to access any property for inspection purposes. We need keys to all exterior doors." I leaned against my door frame, coffee mug in hand, still trying to process what I was hearing. "You want copies of my house keys? Are you out of your mind?" Her face flushed red, and she thrust a stack of papers at me. "It's in the bylaws you signed when you moved in 6 months ago. Emergency access. The board voted on it last week." I took the papers but didn't look at them. "Let me get this straight. You want me to hand over keys to my home so you or anyone on the HOA board can just walk in whenever you feel like it?" "For inspections," she said primly, adjusting the pearls around her neck. "We need to ensure compliance with community standards. Several homeowners have already complied." "Yeah, well, I'm not several homeowners. This is my house, my property, and there's no way in hell I'm giving you keys to it." I started to close the door, but she stuck her sensible beige pump in the gap. "You have 48 hours to comply, Mr. Young. Otherwise, you'll face fines of $500 per day until you do." She pulled her foot back and turned on her heel, marching down my driveway to her white Lexus SUV like she'd just won some kind of victory. I stood there, watching her drive away, my coffee getting cold in my hand. "My name is Owen Young. I'm 32 years old, and I'd bought this house in Meadowbrook Hills after getting a job transfer to Phoenix. The neighborhood was nice, the houses were well maintained, and the HOA seemed like a minor annoyance at worst when I'd moved in. I should have known better. The rest of that Tuesday I couldn't focus on work. I'm a software engineer working remotely from my home office, and normally I could code for hours without distraction. But Karen's demand kept running through my mind. I pulled out the HOA documents I'd signed at closing, reading through page after page of dense legal language. There was indeed a section about property access, but it mentioned nothing about the HOA holding keys. It talked about reasonable notice for inspections, access during emergencies when the homeowner couldn't be reached, and standard stuff about entering yards for landscaping maintenance. Nothing about handing over copies of my house keys. That evening I called my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen. I'd kept his number from the house purchase, figuring I might need it someday. Turns out I was right. "Owen, hey," Marcus answered. "What's going on?" I explained the situation, reading him the exact section Karen had referenced. There was a long pause on the other end. "That's not what that section means," Marcus said finally. "Emergency access means they can enter in an actual emergency, like if your house is on fire or there's a burst pipe flooding the neighbor's property. It doesn't mean they get to hold keys to your house. That would be an enormous liability issue, not to mention a massive privacy violation." "So what do I do? She's threatening daily fines." "Don't give her the keys," Marcus said firmly. "Send a certified letter to the HOA board stating that you're in compliance with all bylaws and that their interpretation of Section 14.7 is incorrect. I'll draft something for you and document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every conversation." She seemed pretty convinced she had the right to demand this. Marcus sighed. "HOA presidents sometimes think they have way more power than they actually do. Just stand your ground. If they try to fine you, we'll fight it." Wednesday morning, I woke up to find a formal notice taped to my front door. It was printed on official Meadowbrook Hills HOA letterhead, stating that I was in violation of community bylaws and had until Friday at 5 p.m. to deliver copies of all exterior door keys to Karen Anderson's residence at 1247 Sagaro Drive. Failure to comply would result in $500 daily fines, as promised. I took pictures of the notice, noting the time and date, then called Marcus again. He told me he'd have the response letter ready by end of day, and I should send it via certified mail immediately. In the meantime, I decided to do some investigating of my own. Meadowbrook Hills was a community of about 200 homes, all built in the past decade. The houses were nice, ranging from 3 to 5 bedrooms with desert landscaping and mountain views. I'd met a few neighbors casually, but hadn't really formed any close friendships yet. That was about to change. I walked down the street to the house next door, where an older couple named Harold and Susan Bennett lived. Harold was outside watering his desert plants and he waved when he saw me approaching. "Morning, Owen," he called out. "How's it going?" "That depends. Did Karen Anderson come by asking you for copies of your house keys?" Harold's friendly expression darkened. "She did, last Friday." "Most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Did you give them to her?" "Hell no. Susan and I have lived here for 8 years and we've never heard of such nonsense. I told her exactly where she could put that request." He chuckled. "Susan was more polite about it, but the answer was the same." "So she's lying about other homeowners complying." "I'd bet on it. You should talk to Rick Morrison across the street. He's on the board, but he's been opposed to a lot of Karen's crazier ideas lately." I thanked Harold and headed across the street. Rick Morrison was just getting into his car, dressed in business casual, clearly heading to work. He was in his mid-40s, with graying hair and a tired expression that deepened when I mentioned the key situation. "She actually went through with it." Rick rubbed his face. "I voted against that proposal, so did 2 other board members. The vote failed 3-2. "Wait, what?" "She told me the board voted to approve it." "She's lying. Karen and her friend Patricia Walker were the only yes votes. The rest of us thought it was insane." "But Karen's been president for 3 years, and she's gotten more controlling every year. This is a new low, though." My anger was building, but I kept my voice level. "So she's threatening me with fines for not complying with a policy that doesn't actually exist, apparently." Rick looked genuinely apologetic. "Look, I'm sorry about this. I'm actually planning to step down from the board after this term. Karen makes everything a nightmare, but if she's threatening illegal fines, you might want to consult a lawyer." "Already on it. But thanks for being honest with me." Rick nodded and got in his car. As he drove away, I stood in the street, processing everything. Karen Anderson wasn't just overstepping her authority. She was actively lying about board votes and threatening homeowners with fake fines to get what she wanted. The question was, why did she want keys to everyone's houses so badly? That afternoon, Marcus emailed me the response letter. It was beautifully written, formally stating that I was in full compliance with all HOA bylaws, that the board's interpretation of Section 14.7 was legally incorrect, and that any fines levied against me would be challenged in court. I printed it out, drove to the post office, and sent it certified mail to both Karen Anderson's home address and the official HOA mailing address. Thursday morning, my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. I was already up, thankfully, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw through the peephole. Karen was back and she'd brought reinforcements. 2 other women stood behind her, both looking equally severe. I opened the door but left the security screen latched. "Mr. Young," Karen said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I see you haven't delivered your keys yet. These are fellow board members, Patricia Walker and Denise Crawford. We're here to collect them in person since you seem to be having trouble complying. I received the board member Rick Morrison's information that the vote to require key copies actually failed 3-2. So there's no policy requiring me to hand over anything. Patricia, a thin woman with short blonde hair, stepped forward. Rick Morrison is no longer on the board. He resigned yesterday. The remaining board members held a special vote and it passed unanimously. I almost laughed. That's convenient timing. Doesn't matter. My attorney has already responded to your previous demand. I'm in full compliance with all actual HOA bylaws. You're not getting my keys. Then you'll be fined, Karen snapped, the false sweetness gone. Starting tomorrow, fine me. I'll see you in court. I closed the door, my heart pounding. Through the window, I watched them huddle on my driveway, clearly arguing about something before finally leaving. I immediately called Rick Morrison. He answered on the second ring, sounding stressed. Owen, I was about to call you. Karen threatened to fine me $10,000 for violating some obscure landscaping rule unless I resigned from the board. I talked to my wife, and we just can't afford a legal battle right now. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. This is insane. She's forcing out anyone who disagrees with her. She is. And now she's got a board of yes women who'll rubber stamp anything she wants. Be careful, Owen. I don't know what her end game is, but she's obsessed with this key thing. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table thinking hard. Karen had systematically removed opposition from the board and was now threatening homeowners with illegal fines to get access to their homes. This wasn't just about power or control anymore. This felt like something else, something worse. Friday afternoon, I got an email from the HOA with an attached fine notice. $500 for non-compliance with board directives, dated that day. The email stated that an additional $500 would be added every day until I complied. I forwarded it to Marcus immediately. His response came within an hour. File a police report. This is extortion. Also, request a copy of the board meeting minutes showing the vote she claims happened. We'll need documentation for court. File a police report. The idea hadn't occurred to me, but Marcus was right. Karen was threatening me with fake fines to force me to hand over access to my home. That was extortion at minimum, possibly conspiracy to commit burglary. Who knew what she planned to do once she had keys to people's houses? I drove to the Scottsdale Police Department that evening. The officer at the front desk directed me to speak with someone in the white-collar crime division. I was passed around a bit before finally sitting down with Detective Sarah Ramirez, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s who listened carefully as I explained the entire situation. So let me make sure I understand, she said, taking notes. The HOA president is demanding you give her copies of your house keys, claiming it's required by HOA bylaws, even though it isn't. She's threatening you with daily fines if you don't comply, even though the board vote she claims happened apparently didn't. And she forced out board members who disagreed with her. Exactly. And I want to file a report for attempted burglary or extortion, or whatever this qualifies as legally. Detective Ramirez nodded slowly. It's definitely concerning behavior. The extortion angle is solid. As for burglary, that's trickier since she hasn't actually attempted to enter your home yet. But let's get this documented. Have any other homeowners complained about this? I know several who refused to give her keys, but I don't know if anyone else has filed reports. We'll look into it. In the meantime, document everything. Don't engage with her unless necessary, and if she shows up at your house again, call us immediately. If she's threatening other homeowners too, we might have a pattern of behavior here. I left the police station feeling slightly better. At least there was now an official record of what was happening. I drove home as the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It would have been peaceful if I wasn't worried about what Karen would do next. Saturday morning answered that question. I woke up to the sound of someone trying to open my front door. The deadbolt was locked, thank God, but I could hear the doorknob rattling, then the sound of something scratching at the lock itself. Someone was trying to pick it. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 while moving to the window. Through the blinds, I could see Karen Anderson crouched at my front door, holding what looked like a lock-pick set. Another woman, Patricia Walker, stood behind her, holding a clipboard and glancing around nervously. 911, what's your emergency? Someone is trying to break into my house. 2 women. They're at my front door right now trying to pick the lock. The dispatcher asked for my address and details. I provided everything quickly, keeping my voice low even though I was upstairs and they probably couldn't hear me. I can see them through the window. One of them is the president of my HOA. She's been demanding I give her copies of my house keys and I refused. Now she's trying to break in. Officers are on the way. Stay inside and stay on the line with me. I watched as Karen continued working on the lock. She clearly had some idea what she was doing, though she wasn't succeeding very quickly. Patricia kept looking up and down the street, playing lookout. The whole scene would have been comical if it wasn't so disturbing. They're not getting in, I told the dispatcher. The deadbolt is solid. But they're definitely trying. Officers are 2 minutes away. Those 2 minutes felt like an hour. Karen was getting frustrated. I could see it in her body language. She abandoned the lock picking and started examining the door frame, like she was considering trying to force it open. That's when the police cars turned onto my street, lights flashing but sirens off. Karen and Patricia looked up in shock. I watched Patricia drop the clipboard and actually start to run, but Karen grabbed her arm. They stood there frozen as 2 police cruisers pulled up to my curb and 4 officers got out. This is it, I told the dispatcher. The police are here, thank you. I hung up and went downstairs, opening the door just as one of the officers, a tall man with a crew cut, reached my porch. Karen and Patricia were already separated, each talking to different officers. Mr. Young, the officer asked. I'm Officer James Kowalski. You're the homeowner who called. Yes, sir. Those 2 women were trying to pick my lock. I have video from my doorbell camera if you need it. I pulled out my phone and showed him the Ring app footage which had captured everything perfectly. Officer Kowalski watched the video, his expression growing more serious. That's pretty clear. Wait here, please. I stood in my doorway, watching as he showed the video to his colleagues. Karen's face went from red to white as she saw it. She started talking rapidly, gesturing wildly. Patricia just looked like she wanted to disappear into the desert. After about 10 minutes, Officer Kowalski came back to me. We're arresting both women for attempted burglary. I need you to come down to the station later today to give a formal statement. Detective Ramirez asked to be notified if there were any developments in your case. You know Detective Ramirez. She sent out an internal memo yesterday about the situation with your HOA. Asked us to keep an eye out for any reports in this neighborhood. Looks like she was right to be concerned. I watched as Karen and Patricia were handcuffed and placed in separate police cars. Karen was screaming about her rights, about how this was her duty as HOA president, about how I was the one breaking the rules. Patricia was crying. Several neighbors had come out of their houses, drawn by the police presence. Harold and Susan Bennett stood in their yard, Susan with her hand over her mouth in shock. After the police left, the neighbors descended. Within an hour, I told the story to at least 15 different people. Everyone was horrified. Several admitted that Karen had pressured them for keys too. but they'd all refused. A few mentioned other questionable behavior from Karen over the years. Unexplained fines, threats, accusations of bylaw violations that didn't actually exist. "She fined us $2,000 last year," said a man named Jeff Taylor, who lived 3 houses down. "Claimed our house color wasn't on the approved list, even though we'd never painted it. It's the original builder color. We had to hire a lawyer to fight it. She tried to force us to remove our solar panels," added another neighbor, Maria Gonzalez. "Said they were aesthetically unpleasing. Solar panels are protected by state law in Arizona. She backed down when we threatened to sue." The picture that emerged was of someone who'd been abusing her position for years, but the key demand was something new. Something that had crossed a line from petty tyranny into actual criminal behavior. I went to the police station that afternoon and gave my formal statement to Detective Ramirez. She looked satisfied but not surprised. "We executed a search warrant on Karen Anderson's home," she told me. "We found keys, a lot of keys, labeled with addresses from your neighborhood." My stomach dropped. "How many?" 23 houses worth. "All carefully organized in a cabinet in her garage. We're contacting all those homeowners now." "Oh my God, how did she get them?" "That's what we're trying to find out. Some homeowners might have given them to her, believing it was required. Others we don't know yet." We also found detailed notes about various properties, including yours. Times when people were usually away from home, notes about valuables seen through windows, security system information. This wasn't just about HOA control. What was it about? Detective Ramirez leaned back in her chair. "We think she was planning burglaries, maybe doing them herself, maybe passing information to someone else. We're still investigating, but several homeowners in Meadowbrook Hills have reported minor thefts over the past year. Small items, jewelry, cash. Nothing major enough to really investigate thoroughly, but now we're looking at everything again." I felt sick. She was robbing her own neighbors, allegedly. We'll need to prove it, but yes, that's our working theory. Patricia Walker is cooperating fully. She claims she didn't know about the thefts, that Karen told her they just needed the keys for emergency access. We're still determining what charges she'll face. What about Karen? Attempted burglary for today's incident, definitely. Possibly multiple counts of actual burglary, theft, extortion, fraud. We're building the case. She's denied everything so far, claiming she has absolute authority as HOA president. I left the police station with my head spinning. I'd thought Karen was just a control freak, maybe someone on a power trip. I never imagined she was actually stealing from people. The next few days were chaos in Meadowbrook Hills. The story hit local news. HOA president arrested for attempted burglary was the headline on every Phoenix news station. Reporters camped out in the neighborhood. Homeowners were furious, scared, and demanding answers. An emergency HOA meeting was called for the following Tuesday. The remaining board members, Patricia excluded since she'd been arrested too, tried to maintain order, but it was pointless. 200 angry homeowners packed into the community clubhouse, all talking at once. Denise Crawford, the last remaining board member who'd been part of Karen's alliance, stood at the front looking overwhelmed. "Please, everyone, let's remain calm." "Calm," shouted someone from the back. "That woman had keys to my house. She could have walked in any time." "We're forming a new board," Denise said quickly. "Emergency elections will be held next week. In the meantime, we've changed all the locks on the community facilities, and we're recommending all homeowners who gave Karen keys change their locks immediately." "Who's paying for that?" demanded another voice. "The HOA will cover the cost of one lock change per affected household," Denise said. It's the least we can do. You think? Maria Gonzalez stood up. Some of us have been complaining about Karen's behavior for years. Where were you when she was threatening people with fake fines and making up rules? Denise had no answer for that. The meeting devolved into shouting. Eventually, a homeowner named David Park stood up and took control. He was a lawyer, and he laid out a plan. Immediate dissolution of the current board, emergency elections with strict oversight, and a complete audit of HOA finances and actions for the past 3 years. We need to know exactly what Karen was doing, who else was involved, and how to make sure it never happens again, David said firmly. The crowd agreed by overwhelming majority. I went home that night exhausted but slightly hopeful. At least the neighborhood was taking action. At least people were paying attention now. Detective Ramirez called me Wednesday morning. We've connected Karen Anderson to at least 12 burglaries in Meadowbrook Hills over the past 18 months. Small items, like I mentioned, but it adds up to about $40,000 in stolen property. We found some of it in a storage unit she rented under a false name. How did you find the storage unit? Patricia Walker. She really is cooperating. Apparently Karen convinced her they were just doing thorough HOA inspections, but Patricia started getting suspicious when Karen kept pocketing small items. She didn't know about the storage unit, but she gave us details that helped us track it down. What about Patricia? What happens to her? Depends on the DA, but she'll likely face reduced charges in exchange for her testimony. She's guilty of attempted burglary for the incident at your house, but if she genuinely didn't know about the larger scheme, she might get probation. And Karen? She's looking at serious prison time if convicted. Multiple counts of burglary, theft, extortion, fraud. Her attorney is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA isn't interested, not with this many victims. Over the next few weeks, more details emerged. Karen had been systematically collecting keys from homeowners for nearly 2 years, using a combination of pressure, lies, and threats. Some homeowners had complied, believing it was required. Others had refused, like me, but Karen had found other ways to access some homes, including bribing a cleaning service employee to make copies of keys from houses they serviced. The stolen items were mostly small but valuable: jewelry, cash, collectibles, electronics. Things that wouldn't be immediately missed or would be assumed misplaced. Karen had been careful, never taking too much from any one house, spreading the thefts out over time. It might have gone on indefinitely if she hadn't gotten greedy and tried to expand her key collection more aggressively. The emergency HOA elections happened 3 weeks after Karen's arrest. David Park was elected president by a landslide. Harold Bennett and Rick Morrison, who rejoined, were elected to the board along with 3 other homeowners known for their level-headedness. Their first action was to hire a forensic accountant to audit the HOA finances. That audit revealed even more problems. Karen had been embezzling HOA funds for years, covering it up with fake expenses and inflated contractor bills. She'd worked with a landscaping company owner who'd submit fraudulent invoices, then kick back a percentage to Karen. In total, she'd stolen nearly $90,000 from the HOA, in addition to the items she'd burglarized from individual homes. I testified at her preliminary hearing in May. It was strange, sitting in a courtroom, telling a judge about that Tuesday morning when Karen had shown up demanding my keys. The prosecutor built a methodical case, walking through each incident, each theft, each fraudulent fine. Karen's attorney tried to argue that she'd had good intentions, that she'd just been trying to protect the community, but the evidence was overwhelming. Karen sat at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered. The imperious HOA president was gone, replaced by a middle-aged woman in an ill-fitting suit, facing the destruction of her entire life. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The trial itself happened in August. I attended several days of it, watching as witness after witness described Karen's actions. Patricia Walker testified, tearful and apologetic, explaining how Karen had manipulated her. Rick Morrison testified about being forced off the board. Detective Ramirez presented the evidence from the storage unit and Karen's home. The prosecution showed the Ring camera footage of Karen trying to pick my lock, which was particularly damning. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 12 counts of burglary, multiple counts of theft, fraud, extortion, and embezzlement. Karen showed no emotion when the verdict was read, just stared straight ahead like she couldn't believe this was happening to her. Sentencing came in September. The judge was not sympathetic. He talked about the violation of trust, the abuse of position, the systematic nature of the crimes. Karen Anderson was sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 8. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, both for the stolen items and the embezzled HOA funds. Patricia Walker received 18 months of probation and 200 hours of community service for her role in the attempted burglary at my house. She'd moved out of Meadowbrook Hills shortly after her arrest. I heard she was living with her sister in Tucson, trying to rebuild her life away from the scandal. Life in Meadowbrook Hills slowly returned to normal after that, or at least a new version of normal. The new HOA board implemented sweeping changes. All board meetings became open to any homeowner who wanted to attend. Financial records were posted online monthly. A community oversight committee was formed to review any major decisions. And most importantly, a bylaw was passed explicitly prohibiting the HOA from ever demanding or holding keys to private residences. David Park turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He focused on actual community improvement rather than petty rule enforcement. The neighborhood felt friendlier, more like an actual community rather than a dictatorship. People looked out for each other now, bonded by shared experience. Harold and Susan Bennett invited me over for dinner one evening in October. We sat on their back patio, watching the sunset over the mountains, talking about how different everything felt now. "You know, Owen," Harold said, sipping his beer, "if you hadn't stood up to her, who knows how long this would have gone on. Most people just comply when someone with authority pushes them around." "I just knew it wasn't right," I said. "Nobody should have keys to my house except me. That's basic common sense." "Common sense isn't that common anymore," Susan said with a laugh. "But seriously, you did the neighborhood a huge favor. A lot of people are grateful." I didn't feel particularly heroic. I just refused an unreasonable demand and called the police when someone tried to break into my house. That seemed like bare minimum adulting, not anything special. But I understood what they meant. Standing up to someone who abuses authority, even in a small way like an HOA, isn't always easy. It's often easier to comply, to go along, to avoid the conflict. The civil lawsuit started in November. Multiple homeowners sued Karen Anderson personally for the thefts and emotional distress. The HOA as an entity also faced lawsuits, with homeowners arguing that the organization had failed in its oversight duties, allowing Karen to abuse her position for years. Those cases would likely drag on for years, but most homeowners were satisfied with the criminal convictions and restitution orders. Marcus Chen, my attorney, told me I had grounds to sue both Karen and the HOA for the emotional distress, the time lost from work dealing with everything and various other damages. I thought about it, but ultimately decided against it. Karen was going to prison and had to pay restitution. She'd already lost everything. Suing her further seemed pointless. As for the HOA, the new board was genuinely trying to make things right, and I didn't want to punish them for their predecessors' crimes. Christmas in Meadowbrook Hills that year was different from what I'd expected when I moved in. The community actually felt like a community. The new HOA board organized a neighborhood light display contest, and people went all out, decorating their homes in spectacular fashion. There was a block party with food trucks and a Santa for the kids. Harold played guitar and led everyone in carols. It was cheesy and wholesome, and exactly what the neighborhood needed. I stood in my driveway that evening, lights twinkling on my house, neighbors laughing and chatting around me, and felt genuinely happy I'd bought here. Yes, the Karen situation had been a nightmare, but it had brought people together in a strange way. We'd all stood up against someone who'd abused power, and we'd won. The neighborhood was better for it. Rick Morrison came over with a beer for me. Pretty different from last Christmas, huh? Were you here last Christmas? Yeah, Karen organized a holiday home compliance review, went around with a measuring tape making sure everyone's decorations met the exact specifications in the bylaws. Fined 3 families for lights that were too bright. He shook his head. This is better. Definitely better. By January, a year after Karen first showed up at my door demanding keys, life had settled into a pleasant routine. I worked from home, took walks around the neighborhood, got to know my neighbors better. The local news had moved on to other stories. The trials were over. The lawsuits were proceeding through their slow legal channels, but they didn't affect daily life. I changed jobs in February, taking a position with a tech company based in California but working fully remote. The new job paid better and had better hours, giving me more free time. I started hiking in the nearby mountains on weekends, exploring the beautiful Arizona landscape I'd moved here for but hadn't really appreciated during the chaos of the previous year. Detective Ramirez called me one afternoon in March. "Wanted to give you an update," she said. Karen Anderson tried to appeal her conviction. The appeal was denied. She's been transferred to the state prison in Perryville. She'll serve her full sentence there. How's she doing? Why do you care? Good question. I thought about it. I don't know. I'm not happy she's in prison, even though I know she deserves it. I'm just glad she's not hurting anyone anymore. That's a healthy attitude, Detective Ramirez said. For what it's worth, prison records show she's been a model inmate so far, taking classes, working in the library. Maybe she's actually learning something. Maybe. After hanging up, I sat in my home office, looking out the window at the desert landscape. Karen Anderson had tried to violate my home, my privacy, my fundamental rights as a homeowner. She'd done it to dozens of people, systematically, over years. She deserved punishment, but I also hoped she'd eventually become a better person, learn from her mistakes, and rejoin society as someone who didn't abuse whatever small amount of power she had. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA published its annual report in April. David Park and the new board had been transparent about everything, including the costs of dealing with Karen's crimes. The HOA had spent nearly $50,000 on legal fees, forensic accounting, and security improvements. But they'd also recovered most of the embezzled funds through asset seizure and restitution payments. The neighborhood was financially stable, and the board projected lower dues for the next year due to reduced administrative costs now that they weren't funding Karen's theft and fake contractor expenses. The report also highlighted improved community engagement. HOA meeting attendance was up 300%. Volunteer participation in neighborhood improvement projects was at an all-time high. Several new committees had formed to handle everything from landscaping to social events to architectural review. The neighborhood felt alive in a way it apparently hadn't in years. I ran into Maria Gonzalez at the grocery store one Saturday. She was one of the homeowners who'd been vocal about Karen's abuses even before the arrest, and I'd gotten to know her better over the past year. "Owen, hey," she said, her cart full of supplies for her daughter's birthday party. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. You already thanked me, multiple times. I know, but I mean it. My husband and I were talking last night about how different things are now. We actually like living here again. We'd been thinking about selling just to get away from the HOA drama, but now we're planning to stay long term. Our kids love it here." "I'm glad," I said honestly. "It's a good neighborhood. It is now. It wasn't always." She hesitated, then added, "You know what the craziest part is? Karen lived here too. She was our neighbor. She saw us at the grocery store, at neighborhood events, at the pool. We were all just people living our lives. And she still decided to steal from us, to manipulate us, to abuse her power over us. I still don't understand how someone does that." I didn't have a good answer. I'd thought about it a lot over the past year. How does someone become that person? Was Karen always like that? Or did the small amount of power as HOA president corrupt her over time? Did she start with good intentions that slowly twisted into something darker? Or had she moved into the neighborhood specifically to run this kind of scheme? "Maybe we'll never understand it," I said finally. "Maybe we just have to be grateful it's over and make sure it doesn't happen again." Maria nodded. "The new board is good about that. They really are. David's been great." We chatted for a few more minutes before going our separate ways. As I drove home, I thought about what she'd said about Karen living among us, being part of the community she victimized. It was a reminder that predators don't always look like predators. Sometimes they look like middle-aged women with pearls and sensible shoes, wielding clipboards and HOA bylaws like weapons. Summer in Scottsdale is brutal, with temperatures regularly exceeding 110 degrees. I mostly stayed inside during the day, working in air-conditioned comfort, then ventured out in the evenings when things cooled down slightly. The neighborhood pool became the social center, with families gathering there most evenings. I'd started swimming laps for exercise, and I got to know more neighbors that way. Everyone had stories about Karen, I learned. Little incidents that seemed minor at the time, but in hindsight were red flags. She'd always been too interested in people's schedules, too focused on when houses were empty, too insistent on entering properties for inspections that never actually found any problems. She came to our house once claiming she needed to check the water heater, one neighbor told me. Said there'd been reports of issues with heaters in houses like ours. My wife let her in. Karen spent 20 minutes walking around our house, looking at everything. We thought it was weird, but she was the HOA president. We trusted her. That was the key word, trust. Karen had systematically betrayed the trust of an entire community. That betrayal ran deep, and rebuilding trust took time. But the new HOA board was committed to transparency and accountability in a way that helped. They held quarterly town halls where homeowners could voice concerns directly. They published detailed financial reports. They actively solicited feedback on decisions before implementing them. It worked. Slowly, the neighborhood healed. The scandal became part of the community's history, a shared experience that had ultimately made the neighborhood stronger, but it wasn't the defining feature anymore. People talked about other things: the new restaurant opening in downtown Scottsdale, the upcoming election, their kids' schools, normal everyday life. I celebrated my 1-year anniversary of the attempted break-in in August. It felt strange to mark such an occasion, but Harold and Susan insisted on having me over for dinner to commemorate it. The day you saved the neighborhood, Harold called it, which was overstating things dramatically, but was sweet nonetheless. To Owen, Harold toasted that evening, raising his wine glass. For having the courage to stand up to tyranny, even when it came wearing pearls and carrying HOA bylaws. I laughed and accepted the toast, though I still felt uncomfortable with the hero worship. I'd just done what anyone should do when faced with an unreasonable demand and an attempted break-in. But I understood their point. Not everyone does what they should do. Sometimes people comply out of fear or exhaustion or the desire to avoid conflict. I'd gotten lucky in a way that my natural stubbornness had served me well in this situation. The forensic accountant's final report came out in September, more than a year after Karen's arrest. It was staggering in its detail. Karen Anderson had embezzled a total of $87,000 from the HOA over a 4-year period. She'd stolen approximately $43,000 in property from individual homeowners over 18 months. She'd levied nearly $30,000 in fraudulent fines, though most of those had been fought and reversed. In total, she'd stolen or attempted to steal nearly $160,000 from her own neighbors. The report also revealed how she'd done it, the specific mechanisms of fraud and deception. Fake invoices from complicit contractors, inflated maintenance costs with the excess paid to her, special assessments that went directly into her pocket. HOA funds used to rent the storage unit where she kept stolen property. It was sophisticated and organized, the work of someone who'd planned this out carefully. She should have gotten 20 years, Susan Bennett said when we discussed the report at a neighborhood meeting. 12 isn't enough for what she did. David Park, leading the meeting, nodded sympathetically but urged calm. I understand the anger. We're all angry, but Karen is in prison. She's paying restitution, and we've implemented systems to make sure this never happens again. We need to focus on moving forward. He was right, of course. Dwelling on anger and revenge wouldn't help anyone. The neighborhood had already spent too much energy on Karen Anderson. It was time to let it go and focus on building the community we all wanted to live in. I'd been living in Meadowbrook Hills for almost 2 years by then, and it finally felt like home. I knew my neighbors. I participated in community events. I served on the new Architectural Review Committee, helping evaluate proposals for home modifications and ensuring the process was fair and transparent. It was everything an HOA should be. A group of neighbors working together to maintain and improve their community, not a dictatorship enforcing arbitrary rules. The holidays came around again, and the neighborhood light display contest was even bigger than the previous year. People had gone all out, with elaborate displays that attracted visitors from across Scottsdale. The HOA organized viewing tours, with proceeds going to local charities. It was wholesome and community-focused in exactly the right way. I decorated my house too, going bigger than I ever had before. Lights on the roof, illuminated figures in the yard, a projection display on the garage door. Harold came over to help me set it all up, and we spent a Saturday afternoon untangling lights and cursing at extension cords, laughing about how ridiculous we probably looked. "This is what HOA should be about," Harold said as we stood back admiring our work. Neighbors helping neighbors, building something together, not some power-hungry president stealing our stuff and threatening us with fake fines. Agreed. Though I could do without untangling these lights every year. That's what makes it worthwhile, the struggle, the effort. Next year we'll convince Susan to help and blame her for any tangles. I won third place in the light display contest, which came with a modest gift certificate to a local restaurant and, more importantly, bragging rights. The neighborhood party that year was even better than the last, with more food, more music, more laughter. Standing in the street with my neighbors singing Christmas carols, I felt genuinely grateful for how everything had turned out. Yes, the Karen situation had been terrible. Yes, it had been stressful and scary and angering. But it had also brought the community together, forced necessary changes, and ultimately made Meadowbrook Hills a better place to live. I wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, but I also couldn't regret how things had ended up. By the spring of my third year in the house, the Karen Anderson saga was mostly history. New homeowners moved into the neighborhood with no knowledge of what had happened, learning about it only if someone told them the story. The houses that had been for sale during the scandal, when some people fled the neighborhood drama, were all sold to new families. Life went on. I got promoted at work, taking on a leadership role managing a team of developers. The job was more challenging but also more rewarding, and I was grateful to be working from home where I could focus without office distractions. The Arizona weather was growing on me too. Yes, summer was miserably hot, but the rest of the year was beautiful, with sunny days and comfortable temperatures perfect for hiking and outdoor activities. Detective Ramirez called one last time in June, almost 2 years after the initial arrest. Wanted to let you know that all the civil cases have been settled. Karen Anderson's assets have been liquidated and distributed to victims as restitution. You should receive a check in the next few weeks. How much? For you personally, about $3,000. That covers the legal fees you paid, the security system upgrade you installed, and compensation for your time and stress. Other homeowners who had property stolen are getting more, obviously, but you're being compensated for your role in bringing everything to light. $3,000. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was something. More importantly, it was closure. The case was truly over now. All the legal proceedings were complete. Karen was in prison, serving her sentence. Justice had been served as much as justice ever is. Thanks for the update, Detective. And thank you for taking the case seriously from the beginning. I know some cops might have dismissed it as an HOA squabble. Are you kidding? An HOA president trying to collect everyone's house keys. That was suspicious from day one. I'm just glad we caught her before she could do more damage. After hanging up, I sat on my back patio, cold drink in hand, watching birds flit between the desert plants in my yard. 2 years ago, I'd been a newcomer to Scottsdale, living in a neighborhood I didn't really know, dealing with an HOA president who turned out to be a criminal. Now I had friends here, a role in the community, a home I genuinely loved. The restitution check arrived 3 weeks later, exactly as Detective Ramirez had said. I deposited it and used part of the money to upgrade my home office, buying a new desk and ergonomic chair. The rest went into savings. It felt good to turn something negative into something positive, to take the money that represented justice served and use it to improve my daily life. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA continued to thrive under David Park's leadership. He was re-elected president for a second term by unanimous vote. The board implemented new programs. A neighborhood watch that actually focused on safety rather than bylaw enforcement, community gardens where residents could grow vegetables together, social events that brought people together without the pressure of perfect compliance with arbitrary rules. It was, in many ways, a model HOA. Other neighborhoods in Scottsdale reached out to ask how Meadowbrook Hills had transformed itself. David and the board shared their story openly, talking about the importance of transparency, community involvement, and checks on power. They spoke at HOA conferences, wrote articles for community management publications, became advocates for HOA reform across Arizona. I watched all this with a mix of pride and amusement. We'd gone from having one of the worst HOAs imaginable to being held up as an example of how to do things right. It was a remarkable transformation, born from necessity and crisis, but sustained by genuine commitment to doing better. 3 years after moving to Scottsdale, I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. The city had become home in a way I hadn't expected. I'd made real friends in the neighborhood. I'd built a life here that felt stable and satisfying. The Karen Anderson incident, which had once seemed like a disaster that might force me to move, had instead become a defining moment that actually made me more connected to the community. I ran into Patricia Walker at a coffee shop in downtown Scottsdale one afternoon. I almost didn't recognize her. She'd cut her hair, lost weight, looked younger and more relaxed than I remembered. She saw me at the same moment and froze, clearly uncertain whether to approach or flee. I made the decision for her, walking over to her table. "Patricia, how are you?" She looked nervous but gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Owen, I'm okay. Just here for the day visiting friends. I live in Tucson now. I heard. How's that going?" "Better than here would be, honestly. Fresh start. Nobody knows me there, knows what happened. I can just be a person, not the woman who helped try to break into someone's house." I sat down, setting my coffee on the table. "For what it's worth, I know you didn't know what Karen was really doing. You were manipulated too." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "I should have known. There were signs. She was always so secretive, so controlling. I just wanted to be part of something, to be important in the community. I was stupid." "You weren't stupid. You trusted someone who seemed trustworthy." "Karen fooled a lot of people. Not you. You saw through her immediately. I got lucky. She came at me too hard, too fast. If she'd been more subtle, who knows? I might have ended up giving her keys too." I wasn't sure that was true, but it seemed kind to say. We talked for a while longer. Patricia told me about her life in Tucson, the job she'd found working at a nonprofit, the therapy she was doing to work through what had happened. She was genuinely trying to rebuild her life, to become someone better than the person who'd stood lookout while Karen tried to pick my lock. "I sent letters to everyone," she said quietly. "Everyone in the neighborhood, apologizing. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say I was sorry." "I got it. I appreciated it." "Did you?" She looked skeptical. "I figured you threw it away. I read it. I could tell you meant it. What you did was wrong, but you faced consequences and you're trying to make amends. That's all anyone can really ask." We parted on good terms, and I watched her drive away thinking about redemption and second chances. Patricia Walker had made terrible choices, but she was trying to do better. Maybe that was worth something. Maybe that was worth a lot. The 4th anniversary of moving to Meadowbrook Hills passed without fanfare. It was just another day, working from home, taking a walk in the evening, chatting with neighbors. Normal life. Good life. The kind of life I'd imagined when I first bought the house, before Karen Anderson had complicated everything. David Park announced he'd be stepping down as HOA president after his current term ended. He'd done an incredible job transforming the organization, but he was ready to hand off responsibility to someone else. Elections were scheduled for the fall, and several qualified candidates had already announced they were running. The neighborhood would be fine, I had no doubt. I considered running myself, but ultimately decided against it. I was happy serving on the Architectural Review Committee, contributing in a smaller way. Being HOA president required a level of time and energy I wasn't willing to commit. Let someone else have that responsibility. I'd done my part by standing up to Karen when it mattered. That was enough. The story of what happened in Meadowbrook Hills spread beyond Scottsdale, beyond Arizona. News articles were written. A true crime podcast did a 3-episode series on the case. I declined to be interviewed, not wanting to relive everything publicly, but other neighbors participated, and the podcast was apparently quite popular. Harold and Susan texted me links to articles and social media discussions about it, amused by our neighborhood's minor internet fame. "We're famous," Harold joked one evening at a neighborhood barbecue. "The neighborhood that took down a corrupt HOA president." "Infamous, maybe," I countered. "I'm not sure this is the kind of fame anyone wants." "Better than being the neighborhood where a corrupt HOA president got away with it," Susan pointed out. "At least we did something about it." She was right. That was the real lesson from everything that happened. People could make a difference when they stood up against abuse of power, even small-scale abuse like an HOA president gone rogue. It required courage, persistence, and sometimes just stubborn refusal to comply with unreasonable demands. But it was possible to fight back and win. 5 years after moving to Scottsdale, I stood in my driveway on a warm evening, watching kids play in the street while parents chatted on lawns. The neighborhood felt safe, friendly, genuine. The kind of place where people looked out for each other because they wanted to, not because an HOA president was forcing them to comply with arbitrary rules. My house, which had almost been violated by Karen Anderson's attempted break-in, was secure and comfortable. I'd made it truly mine over the years, with upgrades and improvements and personal touches. The keys to it stayed firmly in my possession, as they should, as they always would. Sometimes I thought about that Tuesday morning when Karen first showed up demanding my keys. I thought about how different things might have been if I'd complied, if I'd just handed over copies without question. She would have had access to my home. She might have stolen from me. She'd have continued victimizing the neighborhood indefinitely. One person's refusal to accept an unreasonable demand had set in motion the chain of events that brought her down. That thought was simultaneously empowering and sobering. Empowering because it showed that individual action mattered, that standing up to injustice could create real change. Sobering because it highlighted how close we'd all come to continuing to live under Karen's corrupt regime indefinitely. But we hadn't. We'd caught her, stopped her, and built something better in the aftermath. Meadowbrook Hills was a genuinely good neighborhood now, maybe even a great one. The HOA functioned as it should, facilitating community rather than controlling it, supporting homeowners rather than threatening them, operating transparently rather than secretively. And somewhere in Perryville State Prison, Karen Anderson was serving her sentence, hopefully learning that authority comes with responsibility and that betraying people's trust has consequences. I didn't think about her often anymore. She was part of the past, a problem solved, a chapter closed. My life continued, peaceful and fulfilling, in the house I'd fought to keep secure. The desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, the same way it did every evening, beautiful and reliable and free. I stood there watching it, keys in my pocket where they belonged, grateful for the home I'd built and the community I'd helped save. That was enough. That was everything. And I knew, with complete certainty, that I'd made the right choice that Tuesday morning 2 years ago when I'd looked a demanding HOA president in the eye and simply said no.